Glance at the homework assignment, and I think that several of those questions are going to get answered today, for what that's worth. Do remember that we have our first guest speaker on Thursday, and that's our state deer biologist, and he's relatively new to the job. He has I think he has a PhD from University of Georgia, an excellent school, an excellent program. And a fair bit of experience studying deer, but he's relatively new as our state deer biologist. So, you know, maybe take it easy on him with regard to questions might require that he's been there for a long time. He should know deer management principles. He should know what the state is currently doing and how and why. And I do encourage you to ask him questions. If you don't ask him questions, he's going to feel like, boy, one of two things. Either I must have given a lousy presentation, or UT Martin wildlife students are awful and I'm never going to hire any of them, or both. So ask him questions to make him feel good about himself, and to make him feel good about you and our program. Sound good? Okay, thanks. Our first day was those species accounts. Today, the second day of the section, I talk about general principles and considerations that are often in the mix when it comes to managing this group of wildlife, in this case big game in general. He is going to talk on Thursday about big game management in Tennessee. His focus, of course, will be deer, because that's what he is and does. And then remember that next Tuesday will be the issues day. Everybody's going to come in. You're going to write a topic on the board about big game management. It could be something that, you know, comes up in lecture, or that hasn't come up much but that you know about, that you want us to kind of just discuss a little bit, okay? So come prepared. I'm not saying if you think of something, feel free to write it on the board. I'm saying every one of you will write something on the board, okay? So come prepared next Tuesday for that. You can be thinking about that between now and then, okay? All you have to do is just write the term, the topic, the word, whatever, and we'll take it from there, okay? All right, any questions before I get going on big game management? All right, groovy. So this is kind of a mishmash of stuff, but before we jump into it, a couple of quick terms. I think most of you know some of these, but some of you might not know all of them. And just to be perfectly clear, when we're talking about things like deer and elk and moose and sheep and goats and such, you'll often hear terms like ruminant or ungulate or artiodactyle, and I just want to be sure everybody knows what those mean, what those are, okay? And I have just updated the course PowerPoint file, so it is on campus. So if I go too fast for you here to write anything down, know that the PowerPoint's on campus, all right? So a ruminant is an animal with a rumen. Who's got that? Who's absolutely familiar with it? You're all over it. Okay. If you're not, a ruminant means it has a rumen. It actually also has three other stomachs. It's a four-chambered stomach, or a four-stomached individual, however you want to say it. A rumen, reticulum, omasum, and abomasum, in that order. What's significant about that is that the rumen is an anaerobic fermentation chamber, which means that whereas most generalized mammalian stomachs undergo aerobic digestion, that is, bacteria that use oxygen, the rumen doesn't use oxygen, which allows it to ferment stomach contents, and that means that it can consume and effectively get nutrients out of cellulose, which an aerobic stomach can't as easily do unless it does something specialized like a rabbit, which is a coprophage, which means it eats its own poop and gets the nutrients out of it the second time around, okay? But what deer and elk and other ruminants can do is digest that cellulose in this fermentation tank, the rumen. And when you hear about cow burps, that's the byproduct of anaerobic decomposition, methane. So that is a real thing. All right, so that's going to be deer, elk, sheep, goats, moose. It's not going to be the canids, which are what? What is a canid?
Dog.
Which is, where did the word canid come from? Nah, be more specific. Dogs.
Canine.
What? Canidae. It's a member of the family Canidae, the dogs, right? Or felids, which is Felidae, the cats. Or ursids, which is Ursidae.
Bears.
Just say it.
The bear.
The bears. Yeah, not being confused with bulls. All right. So next, an ungulate it used to be a member of the clade Ungulata, but they've since learned that, well, there's actually a whole bunch of others that are in other groups. So now there's this like really big clade, and a clade is a group of organisms that share a common ancestor and its descendants. It could be like a super order, but it could also include classes, so it can be something bigger than that, okay? But it's a member of the clade Ungulata, which is the hooved mammals with hooves. Deer, elk, sheep, goats, moose, pronghorn pig. Not the canids, not the felids, not the ursids. So that's the ungulates. And then an artiodactyl is a member of the order Artiodactyla, which is the even-toed ungulates, which is all those same hoofed mammals again. It does not include the odd-toed ungulates, which is things like horses and other species we don't have native here to North America. So, everybody cool with those? All right. So just a little bit of review. Some of this slide information, some of you will have seen before in other classes, and those of you that haven't, if you're wildlife majors, you'll see it in other classes later. But a lot of it will be new. Big game management's been around forever. It was practiced by the Greeks and the Romans. Marco Polo noted that they were using it in Kublai Khan's empire back in the 1200s. He couldn't harvest deer during the fawning season. King Charles II relocated deer from Germany to England in the 17th century. In the 1600s, we were practicing propagation, artificial replenishment. So wildlife management is not new. And if you consider too that you know domestic animals came from wild animals, that you could argue that early animal agriculture, livestock agriculture was in a sense wildlife management. Here in the United States, it's been around since before we were a country. In the 1600s, Massachusetts was offering bounties on predators. The 1700s, all of the colonies had deer seasons. As early as 1739 was the first game warden in Massachusetts, deer wardens, to protect deer from people who were just shooting them to skin them and send the hides back to Europe and not using the meat. Back then, deer meat was an important food resource. We didn't have a well-established agriculture on this continent yet, so we didn't need wanton waste. In 1779, North Carolina prohibited shining deer with candles and reflective material to direct lights and make deer free so they can shoot them at night. So spotlighting is not new. It's been around for a long time. In the 1700s, New York decided that hunting deer with hounds was not giving deer a sporting chance. It was too effective. They were taking too many deer, and so they made a call that they felt that hunting deer with dogs was not fair chase in the 1700s. Yeah.
How close do you have to get to a deer to spotlight it with a candle?
I've always wondered that myself.
Do you think they use like mirrors and with the candle?
Yeah, and I don't know. I would sure like to try though. Wouldn't you? Yeah. I don't know.
What's the reflective lens called again?
The reflective lens on the deer's eye is called the tapetum lucidum, and that reflects. What's that?
Greenwald calls it the tapetum lucidum.
Tapetum lucidum. Well, that's because he's from up north, but we don't hold him against him. He can't help it. Right? Okay. Tapetum lucidum. No, yeah, I would be even happier to say it to his face.
Yeah.
Tapetum lucidum.
That's funny.
Tapetum lucidum. Very good. Okay. So it's a reflective layer behind the cornea of the eye that absorbs any ambient light, like in low light conditions, like moonlight at night, that allows those animals to see much more effectively. And it's also when you shine a light and see those deers or raccoons or other animals' eyes shining, that's what you're seeing. All right, so very early on, some of our first losses of wildlife were due to direct exploitation. And what we were exploiting enough to cause them to decline were large game species, often that were relatively K-selected. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the terms R selection and K selection means they reproduce kind of slowly. They don't have very many young. It takes a while for the young to grow up. So those species, if you harvest too many of them, it knocks their numbers back and it takes a while for them to recover. R selected species, think like rabbits or mice or little animals. They have a whole lot of young and they reproduce and mature real fast. And if you shoot a bunch of them, they'll have even more young and reproduce even faster. So they respond very effectively to hunting, okay? So we were seeing losses of more K-selected species, and big game is usually where those K-selected, the group that they reside in. Bison and elk were eliminated east of the Mississippi River mostly by 1850. The last elk in Tennessee was shot in Obion County in the 1889, I think, so just a few years later. 1915. There was a federal predatory bird and mammal control program, that is, a bounty program that the federal government initiated to get rid of wolves and cougars and bears, thinking that, remember those some of you might remember the 5 stages of wildlife management that Aldo Leopold talked about. The first thing we do when we notice numbers going down is control hunting. The second thing we often do is control predators. So we were controlling hunting. It's like, maybe we need to control predators too. We didn't have any seasons on pronghorn or elk prior to the 1800s. So we were managing white-tailed deer as early as the 1600s and the 1700s, but those other species not until a good bit later. So we control hunting, we control predators, and then we get into things like refugia, creating places where wildlife would not be hunted or where they could rest and where maybe you could even feed them. So we started thinking in the late 1800s and started acting in the age of Theodore Roosevelt in the early 1900s. Let's see if we can feed deer in places where we're seeing them starve in the wintertime. Let's give them winter food. That's bound to be good. That'll allow them to be more of them. We've learned since that that's not good, okay? But it's interesting to note that in 1912, Congress created a national wildlife refuge. Does anybody remember when the first national wildlife refuge was created? 1903, yeah, at Pelican Island in Florida. That was Theodore Roosevelt. It was just a few years later that Congress created the National Elk Refuge in Jackson, Wyoming, at the base of the Tetons. And who was at the Wildlife Society meeting where the biologist from the National Elk Refuge visited with us last semester. That was Eric Cole, who I went to school with. He studied elk at Oregon State, and I studied grouse there. So they created a National Elk Refuge in 1912 because they were seeing a lot of elk die in the wintertime. And they would come down into that valley in the winter and there wasn't enough food for them to get through. So they said, well, if we just feed them in the winter, then we'll have more elk to hunt, right? That actually was, we've come to learn scientifically, a bad idea because you're fighting diseases and you're making a trap for predators. But this was mandated by Congress, and it's wildly popular with the public. Has anybody ever been to Jackson Hole, Wyoming? Would you call it a ritzy, affluent tourist town? Very, very, very much so, right? A lot of money, yeah. And those people love their elk. So even though scientifically probably the wisest thing to do would be to stop feeding them through the winter, that mandate to Congress, it would take a congressional act to close that down. And no congressman wants to say, I want to close that down, because they wouldn't get reelected in that area. We've learned in the 30s and 40s that winter feeding hay failed to reduce starvation. It caused problems with disease, with crowding, and with overuse of natural forage, especially in the summertime. So it's generally frowned upon in our profession. That's what the feeding program looks like at the National Elk Refuge these days in the wintertime. They get thousands of elk. They feed them tons of food, and you can just imagine, you know, the potential for disease spread. You do not see elk behaving this way if you're not providing them with artificial food resources. One kind of cool thing that's happened is that wolves have come down from Yellowstone, and so predation on this herd is occurring. And you might think, that's, you know, one thing we wanted to prevent, we didn't want to happen, but predation can act as a very positive force, right? It can kind of cull the sick and the weak and keep the population healthy. So some people think it's really cool to see wolves interacting in that ecosystem too. That's not the only place where we've had Congress mandate national refuges that weren't really the intent of the National Wildlife Refuge System. Heart Mountain National Antelope Refuge is in southeastern Oregon, and Congress mandated this National Wildlife Refuge as a spring, summer, and fall range for pronghorn. So there are some national wildlife refuges out there mandated by Congress for game species, which is not a trust species of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service anymore, right? Who's responsible for antelope and elk?
States.
The states that they live in, that's right, because they're not generally migratory species, they're not endangered. So these are not what we call federal trust species that the federal government is responsible for, except in these cases where Congress said, you shall feed them and provide habitat for them in these places. It's kind of a weird thing, right? But there it is. Okay, some of you might remember one of the big wildlife case studies was mule deer on the Kaibab Plateau. This is kind of near the north rim of the Grand Canyon, if you've ever been there. This all happened in the early 1900s and was documented by a publication by Rasmussen, who showed estimated mule deer populations. This is in the thousands, you know, so this would be, you know, like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. In 1906 or so, the population following federal predator control and private predator control and state predator control shot up. Okay, so they were killing bears and mountain lions and wolves. And we started seeing damage to the habitat. We started seeing fawns starving to death. The state and federal biologists were warning, we've got to stop this, we've got to stop this, we've got to let the predators come back, we've got to harvest more deer. And finally the population crashed at 100,000 animals. 60% of the herd starved in 2 years. And if we had done something early, Rasmussen suggested that we might have been able to hold the population at 30,000 animals, but it kept on going down. And in addition to the lower carrying capacity and population, the habitat was so dramatically degraded and altered that it's a different ecosystem. It doesn't have the grasses and forbs that it used to. It has a heavy component of shrubs that are not palatable to mule deer, and it's never grown back, you know, in a century. So there can be long-lasting effects to predator control if we're not careful and we don't realize what we're doing. Okay, who remembers these terms, population regulation, top-down and bottom-up population regulation? Anybody remember those terms? Some of you from other classes, some of you haven't had that yet. So this is a common question, especially that gets asked in game management, especially, is prey, the species that predators are eating and hunting, is prey regulated by predators and hunters, or is it regulated by lack of good habitat and other environmental conditions like water and such? And we call predation and hunting, if that's what's controlling predators, is that if predators and hunting is killing them and keeping the population from getting higher, we call that top-down regulation, okay? And we call those decimating factors. And if the population goes up, as long as the habitat gets better and better, and the only thing that keeps the population from continuing to go up is limited habitat, then that's a bottom-up regulating factor, let's see, decimating factors and a regulating factor, okay? So we have a variety of case studies where we've kind of looked at this. I talked about the Kaibab Plateau wolves and mule deer. We got rid of the wolves, and the mule deer was looking really good for a while. Boy, they're going up really, really fast, right? And that's a classic example of short-sighted management. In the long term, what we thought was top-down control that we got rid of turned out eventually to be bottom-up control because the habitat crashed, so the populations crashed, right? Another example is Isle Royale. Who's heard of Isle Royale National Park? Anybody? Okay, this is in Lake Superior, right there at Canada and Minnesota. How close were you to there, Jay?
Pretty close.
Pretty close? Yeah.
2-3 hours.
Oh, cool. Where were you located?
North central Minnesota.
Okay. Yeah.
Just like 45 minutes south of Voyageurs National Park.
Oh, cool. Very good. Okay. So you never got a chance to get to Isle Royale?
No.
Someday.
Probably next year.
Oh, excellent. Good. You only get there by ferry. You can't take a car. But Isle Royale is a national park. It's a great big island, and it has moose and it has wolves. And it's really kind of it's a unique study area because you don't have a whole lot of other big game prey species and big predators. So these two species are interacting with each other, and biologists have looked at that a lot. And what they've seen is that there's kind of a symbiotic regulation going on. One regulates the other and vice versa. We've seen that with other species too. Usually nature is more complex. There's a lot of predators and a lot of prey, and they're all interacting. And if you get rid of one predator, another predator will increase and take its role. If you get rid of one prey, other prey will increase, and the predators will move to that one. We see it also with Canada lynx and snowshoe hare in Canada in the wintertime. The snowshoe hare is about the only thing that the Canada lynx eats. And since you have that very simple relationship, what you have is the hare goes up and the Canada lynx goes up in response to it. And once the Canada lynx starts to go up, the hare goes down and the lynx goes down in response to it. And you have this offset sign pattern, a regular periodicity in population fluctuations with each one regulating and being regulated by the other. A top-down, bottom-up symbiotic relationship, which is cool. As a matter of fact, also in that same area of Minnesota, Michigan, northern Wisconsin, rough grouse exhibit exhibit a 10. It's not big game, but they're still cool. 10-year periodicity, a 10-year cycle in their populations. Due, we think, to a very close relationship with great horned owls, and to the point where hunters who go from other places to hunt rough grouse on a regular basis, they only go during the top 2 or 3 years of their cycle. They don't even bother during the other years because they're so much lower in population density. So this is a photo from Isle Royale where wolves are largely dependent on those moose. When the moose are doing great, the wolves can do very well. When there aren't moose, they make do on everything else that's out there, smaller mammals and such, but they don't do as well. So when it comes to that question of whether large mammals, large herbivores, prey species, are regulated by food or by predators, a hypothesis that is very popular is called the exploitation ecosystem hypothesis. Anybody heard of that before? No? I'm introducing you to something new. Okay, it's very simple. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, I'm familiar with the concept. And the concept is this. In a productive terrestrial ecosystem, so water, there's a lot more trophic levels. We're not going to talk about aquatic systems. We're going to talk about terrestrial systems. Where you have a very productive system, a lot of food, a lot of energy, primary production, that's plant production from sunlight, right? Is high enough to support 3 trophic levels: plants, herbivores, and predators. Predators depress the herbivore populations, which releases the plants from herbivore control, enables them to increase in biomass, which allows the herbivores to grow back up, which allows the carnivores to grow back up. So you have this triad of symbiotic dependency, right? In a less productive ecosystem, herbivore populations are too small because there's not enough productivity to grow that much plant food to support predator populations, so there are only 2 trophic levels, with herbivores regulating plant biomass. So it's a pretty simple idea, and ecologists, predator ecologists, ecosystem ecologists often look for that in different systems. So like, how common are predators in this arid or semi-arid system? Good? Okay. Another thing that big game ecologists often look at in research is availability of plants. And I got a couple slides on plants that you might not absolutely love, but here they are. And the first one is that plants have a variety of defense mechanisms that protect them against herbivory. And those have evolved over millennia, okay? One is ability of the herbivore to harvest food. Maybe the plants grow food high enough off the ground so that herbivores can't get to the palatable part of the plant, or under the ground, or whatever, okay? A second is ability to process sufficient quantities of food. Maybe the food has low enough nutritional quality that it's not worth being eaten by the herbivore, at least most of the time. Now, there are a lot of situations where we see that partially happening. There are a lot of animals that are generalists in the summer, but they have to become specialists in the wintertime when there's not as much food available. So they key in on one thing. There might not be the highest quality food, but there might be a lot of it, okay? Or maybe it's not the most abundant food, but it's very high quality. Who can give me an example of a species, it doesn't have to be big game, that tends to be a generalist in the summer and a specialist in the winter? How about a species out on the quad? Squirrels, right? All sorts of stuff in the summertime. We think squirrels eat nuts. Well, they eat nuts usually in the winter, but in the summer they're eating all sorts of stuff, okay? Rough grouse, what's that?
But apply to a lot of rodents.
Yeah, you know, keying in on a particular few species of seed. A lot of species, right? Rough grouse in the wintertime down here in the southeast. In the summer, eat all sorts of stuff. In the winter, they eat 3 things. Anybody want to guess what any of them are? No, that would be blue grouse, eat conifer needles, not rough grouse. Yeah. You do. You'll get it soon, I promise. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah. Any other guesses?
You told us before.
I have. Mountain laurel leaves,
That's horrible.
Christmas fern leaves, and
Quarter pounders and sheep.
yeah, that.
Quarter pound cheeseburger.
Mountain laurel, Christmas fern, and greenbrier, smilax leaves. Yeah. Good. Okay. Third plant constraint to herbivory, ability to digest sufficient nutrients at a rate consistent with the animal's needs. So they might have compounds, and plants might produce compounds in the food that make it relatively undigestible. Anybody know what the scientific name of the little trees are at the east and west entrances of Brim Hall? I'll give you a hint. They're hollies. They're deciduous. They're native hollies, native to the deep south.
American holly?
What's that?
An American holly?
Not American holly. They're called Yapon holly. Does that ring a bell? Anybody know the
Ilex vomitoria.
Ilex vomitoria? There we go. Right. So they have a compound associated with their berries that cause birds to upchuck those berries. They're not digestible. And there are lots of other examples that they don't necessarily throw them up, but they just can't get much nutritional value out of them. They have a variety of compounds that just make them where they don't digest. They can't get a lot of nutrients out. Ability to metabolize or convert digested plant nutrients into animal products. So there's just a variety of chemical ways that the plants have evolved. Of course, not consciously, but just plants that happen to have this survive better because they're not being exploited as much by animals, right? So mutations that cause plants to develop those compounds benefit them. So, other than for growth, the greatest energy demand on mammals is for reproduction, okay? And those are the two main things that evolution is working on, right? Animals just instinctively are trying to survive, and they're trying to pass on their genes. They're trying to reproduce. And when it comes to limiting nutrients for those processes, giving them energy to survive and the nutrients they need to reproduce, there are two main, what we call nutrients. They're not necessarily really nutrients, but we'll call them nutrients that are probably in most cases most limiting. And the first one is energy in the form of calories. We don't think of calories as being a nutrient, but we're going to call it that here. And the second one is protein. Now, proteins can be contrasted to, what are they in a group with? What are their two types of nutrients? Proteins. What's bread and pasta? Carbs, carbohydrates, and now amino acids are within proteins. So you got protein, carbohydrate, and fats. Yeah. So fats store energy for later. Carbohydrates are quick energy for now. Proteins are both quick energy, but they also have amino acids for growth and building cells. So proteins are probably the most rare of those three. So energy and proteins are probably the main two things that are lacking in nature. And if we've got a limiting factor when it comes to food, this is where we're often looking. We need more energy, and specifically we need more protein energy, right? So two approaches to evaluating habitat to determine how much protein and energy there is for herbivores. One is the direct approach, where you examine the plant communities. So wildlife biologists and managers for Tennessee Game and Fish Commission, and for a little while, Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, every late summer, right about now, okay, in late August and early September, would do mast surveys. They would do roots every year, and they would go to big mature oak trees, and they would look, and they would section off, grid off a certain number of limbs, of branches, count how many acorns there were, and they would compare it to past years to get an index of hard mast production. All right, and as a general rule of thumb, I keep getting into some later stuff here. Hard mast, that's nuts, okay? That's good for not only squirrels, but deer and bears and pigs and lots of other species. 1 year out of 4 is a bumper crop, is a great year. 2 years out of 4 are average. 1 year out of 4 is usually largely a mast failure, where squirrels and such are depending on soft mast, okay? On average, that's kind of what we see. So the direct approach is examining plant communities and looking at how much forage or food is being produced. An indirect approach is to examine body condition of the individual animals. And there's various things we can look at, like how much fat is on the kidney. The kidney, create a kidney fat index. The more fat on the fat in humans, we think of maybe too much as a negative thing, but in animals, if they're able to build up fat reserves, that means that's a good healthy thing, because that fat reserve is going to go away in the wintertime. Okay. So kidney fat, we look at the amount of parasites in the abomasum in the fourth stomach, little worms, parasitic worms. The more parasites, the more stressed they are. The more stressed they are, they don't stress about bad grades, they stress about poor food resources, right? And in poor winter condition, maybe do things such as poor summer habitat. So we have to be careful. Just because they're doing lousy in the winter doesn't mean we have bad winter habitat. They might have gone into the winter in poor condition, and winter's always rough on animals, here, where you have cold winters. Okay, this is probably my least favorite slide today, so let's get it over with, okay, Adelia? Okay, good, all right. So ways that biologists have studied nutritional status of large mammals can be categorized into 3 main categories. Body fat abundance, which I mentioned, blood chemistry profiling, and measuring urinary excretion of urea, allantoin, and creatinine. And I am not going to get any farther into this stuff than what you're seeing on the slides, okay? So you don't have to have a thorough understanding of what these are and how they work. Just be familiar with these basic terms and ideas, okay? Body fat abundance is things like I mentioned, the amount of kidney fat or just the amount of fat in general. That can be measured in a variety of ways. Water dilution, more water means less fat. Bioelectrical impedance, we hook them up to electrodes. More electrical resistance means less water, thus more fat. And then the one that we can most easily understand is ultrasonography. Dr. Jerry Gresham is retired, passed away, department chair here, who used ultrasound to determine the quality of meat in cows. He would look at the amount of marbling using ultrasonography, the same thing we look at babies in the womb with. And that can be used to find. And we actually tried it. Jerry and I went out to Milan Arsenal, and we darted a few deer and used the ultrasound to try to see how well we could determine just body fat index in several places, and it worked okay. Probably with a lot more research we could have come up with something pretty good, but that's been used in a variety of ways for a variety of species. So if I ask you on the test, for example, to tell me three primary ways that we determine nutritional status of large mammals, your answer would be body fat abundance, blood chemistry profiling, and measuring urinary excretion, and of your urea, allantoin, and creatinine. If I were to get really mean and say, give me 3 ways that we measure body fat abundance, you would give me those 3 right there, okay? That would be pretty ornery of me, because if you asked me right now to tell you those, I probably couldn't remember them myself. So they're easy enough to look up, okay? Back to stuff that is more interesting, I think, to us is field ecologist type folks. Ungulates, big game prey species, have a couple of primary strategies against predation. And those are hider and follower strategies. And generally, hider strategies are used by species with altricial young, and follower strategies are used by species with precocial young. What altricial and precocial mean are this, for those of you that don't know or don't remember. Our selected species very often have more altricial young. That means they're born or hatched when they're very quickly ready to rock and roll, okay? They open their eyes very quickly, they're not blind for a long time, they have hair or fur, and they can travel and follow their parents within minutes or hours. That's precocial young, sorry about that. Altricial young are born or hatched blind and helpless and naked, and they're with their parents for a long time. The parents have to take a lot of care of them. We see altricial young more, I'm sorry if I got that backwards a moment ago. We see altricial, helpless young more in K-selected species. They really have to take care of their young for a long time. And we see precocial young, advanced, born or hatched, ready to go in our selected species. Does anybody ever get those mixed up? If it helps, I don't know if you remember what I do for myself is, did you guys ever see Mary Poppins?
Yes.
Okay, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. If you say it loud enough, it makes you sound precocious. It makes you sound advanced. It makes you sound grown up. So precocious means you're farther along, you're more advanced. Does that help a little bit? Okay. Precocial, okay. So white-tailed deer, mule deer typically live in dense habitats. Even though these are relatively R-selected species, especially white-tailed deer, they do have altricial young, okay, not precocial young. White-tailed deer young, has anybody ever heard the term alarm bradycardia? Anybody? Nobody? Okay, this is really cool. You guys want to know this, okay? White-tailed deer, has anybody ever come across a white-tailed deer fawn just lying there? And it's doing perfectly fine, but it's lying there? You're like, why is it just lying there? It's lying there because as a physiological response to your presence, its heart rate lowers a whole lot and makes it lethargic to where it just lies there and doesn't move. And that's a physiological adaptation that's evolved over millennia because If it tried to run, a predator could pretty much catch it and eat it every single time. It's got a better chance of surviving if it just lies there and doesn't move. So alarm bradycardia during its first couple weeks is a predator avoidance response of the species, which is very cool, right? 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 Okay. I'm not sure Amber agrees with me, but okay.
Oh no, I was just thinking back because over the summer we accidentally set up a mist net right beside a bed, and Mama and Fawn came back, and Mama was not happy. We kept coming back every 10 minutes. The Fawn would freeze, and then Mom would run every 10 minutes. Same pattern. And I was like, poor lady's gotta be tired.
Yeah, that's right.
She was upset.
She had a rough night, but
Yeah.
and it was all good.
Yeah.
Very cool. Follower strategy we see in species often that are live in open habitats. Okay, this is where a predator can see them they can't easily hide. A predator can see them from a long way away. So caribou, bison, these are precocial species where the young are able to get up and move pretty quickly, because if they just lay there, predators are going to find them. So they're just evolutionarily adapted that way. Okay. Different predators have different predation strategies, and of course, as soon as I tell you that a species would never do one of these other strategies, one of you is going to show me a video of it doing that. Okay, so all wildlife, there's an exception to every rule. Every animal, they love making a point of proving me wrong. As soon as I say the only fox that's going to climb a tree is a gray fox, one of you is going to find a video of a red fox climbing a tree, or whatever, okay?
Or a turtle climbing a tree.
A turtle climbing a tree, or a turtle eating a deer, or something. So mountain lion, jaguar, polar bear, these are solitary predators, okay? They use the ambush style of predation, just as you can imagine. They sit very still, and they go. I was elk hunting in Oregon a few decades ago, and I was in the high country. I was on snowshoes and in the Eagle Cap Wilderness, and I stopped. I was in the woods, and I stopped at the edge of a clearing. It was a mountain clearing, and about 400 yards across this grassland clearing, there was a rock outcropping that came out of the mountainside, and it looked just like there was a mountain lion lying on that outcropping, looking out over the grassland, and I watched it, and I got my binoculars, and I glassed it for like 15 or 20 minutes. It never moved. And I thought, I think it's a mountain lion, but I'm not sure. So I went on this other way and hunted for the day. And that evening, I was coming back down, and I came to where I had stopped. And I turned around and looked in that rock, and there was nothing on top of it. So I think that was a mountain lion doing its ambush thing, just wait for somebody to come along, not moving a bit, which doesn't have anything to do with anything, but it was cool. Wolves are social predators, as you know. They hunt in packs. They're cursorial. They're runners, and they will run down prey over long distances. They'll just wear them down, right? And then black and brown bears are solitary foragers. They're very much omnivorous. So they eat a lot of berries and seeds and vegetation, small mammals or birds if they can get to them, and they're just opportunistic with regard to larger mammals. Was it this class I was telling the story about taking a predator ecology class from Mike Pelton at UT Knoxville back in the 80s? Did I tell you guys about this?
The bear jumping out.
The bear jumping out. I told you guys about that. Yeah, so he was telling the class, actually, bears hardly ever eat white-tailed deer. It hardly ever happens. They were walking on the road in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and it had just brush all right on either side. And it was just a couple minutes later that a deer came stumbling into the road, and a bear jumped on it and drug it off into the brush. So they're opportunistic. They'll take advantage of it if it happens. Right?
Right.
Right. Good. Okay. Has anybody ever thought about or read about or contemplated or wondered, why the heck did they herd up? Because they're an awful lot easier to see in a herd than they are solitary. Has anybody wondered about that before?
Very because of protection, because...
No. Don't answer it. I'm asking if you've wondered it.
Well,
Have they?
You always tell us to speak up.
Well, yeah, good, yeah. No, but has anybody ever wondered about that? You guys should be wondering more about animals. Yeah, I've certainly wondered. Go ahead, Caitlin, why?
I figured generally because for protection.
Yeah. Okay, so, if there's a big herd of elk or a pronghorn, or if there's a big colony of nesting seagulls, they might be easier to spot. But for any one individual, the chance that they're the one that's going to get eaten is lower, right? At least at any given time. So it reduces the chance for that one individual to be taken. There's a collective bunch of animals who are all looking for predators. So you got more eyes and ears and noses working to detect presence of predators and who can sound the alarm. In choosing which individual to pursue, the predator might hesitate for a moment and decide, I'm going after this one, and that gives that one the second that it needed to gain ground and escape. Individuals may devote more time to foraging since many others are present to help keep watch. So, how many of you have been hunting deer and you've had a deer out in front of you and it just would not let down its guard for 1 second, right? And you're just waiting for that chance to lift that gun. It's like, that deer is so much on guard. When there's a bunch of them, they can kind of depend on each other a little bit more and it gives them more time to feed. So what are some species that have rump patches? Lighter colored rumps.
White-tailed deer.
White-tailed deer. Elk. Bighorn sheep.
Pronghorn.
Pronghorn. Good. So, and if we think those are all species that at least at times, do move in groups, and those rump patches can serve as visual indicators to help fleeing individuals stay together. Because, it might be easy to think, isn't that a big flag for the predator? So the predator can find them? Yeah, but it lets the group stay together too. So the fact that that's maintained itself over time, over the millennia, tells you that the benefit has outweighed the cost so far for those species.
Gives me a target.
Shooting at the wrong end, bub. Yeah.
Sounds a little bit.
That's that Texas heart shot.
Depending on the gun you're using.
Okay, all right, yeah. All right, so to review, polygyny is a form of what?
Mating system.
It is a form of one of the three primary mating systems. Monogamy. Polygyny is a form of which one? Polygamy, right? And polygamy includes polygyny and polyandry, right? We don't see polyandry, one female mating with multiple males, very often in the vertebrates. We see it more in invertebrates, okay? It's a specialized situation where females are able to detect which male donor has superior genes, okay, and fertilize itself from that male. But in mammals, what we typically see in prey species usually is polygyny, and it can come in two forms. Resource defense polygyny is where resources are clumped and predictable. So think like water sources, where it's staying in the same place. You know where it's going to be. There's water here, there's water there, there's water there. Dominant males defend territories and attract female young groups to those territories that have, look what I have, water, right? And as long as I can beat up all the males, then I have mates, right? And the pronghorn is an example of a species that practices that. The other is female defense polygyny, when resources are evenly distributed, sparse, or clumped, but unpredictable. So imagine the Great Plains, where you never knew when there was going to be a fire or something that caused all the forage to be burned up. Where's the good forage as we're moving this way across the landscape? I don't know. I don't have access to the news. I don't know where the fires were last week. So you never know, right? So elk, bighorn sheep, muskox, these are species that practice female defense polygyny, where males keep a harem and they defend that harem against other mature males, right? Sorry, this is from 2016. I didn't get it from the last. Every usually 5 years, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service works with the U.S. Census Bureau to conduct a survey of fishing, hunting, and wildlife-associated recreation. But COVID pushed that back, and that just came out this last summer, and I have not input the numbers from this last one. But the trends are going to be about the same. In 2016, 9.2 million hunters went after big game in the United States. That's almost 3% of Americans, and on average, about 5% of Americans hunt. So, 3/5 of those people, almost a little over half, were hunting big game. Expenditures, how much did they spend in pursuit of big game? And this is for everything: hotel, gas, food, on these trips, everything, guns, ammunition, licenses. Was about $15 billion. So that's a pretty significant amount to the American economy. Yeah.
How do they figure that out with hotels and gas and stuff?
They ask in the survey, how many trips did you go on? How much did you spend when they survey hunters? They don't survey every hunter, but they send a survey to a bunch of hunters across the United States. And they ask them just to give us your most realistic estimate. How much did you spend on hotels, on food, on gas? So they're just going on people's honesty. Yeah. Okay. Big game hunting is the primary revenue source for most wildlife agencies. If we didn't have white-tailed deer in the southeast, TWRA and other agencies wouldn't make anywhere near as much money. Okay. And hunting revenue is also critical for many small towns. And this is an interesting thing. Without getting into the whole duck issue, we can get into this more later when we talk about waterfowl. Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency changed up their duck blind system. The public blinds for hunting ducks is available to the public. Some of you are very familiar with that. Some of you might not be as familiar. We'll talk about that some more a lot later. But the way that it used to be was that on one day every year, last day of August, I forget exactly what date it is, late August, every wildlife management area in the state that had duck blinds that you could come and put your name in the hat and see if you could have a duck blind for the year. They had the drawings for those duck blinds on the same day. So you had to choose which WMA you're going to go to put your name in the hat, right? You couldn't go to more than one. And on those days, the places where they had those duck blind drawings, those little towns typically would get thousands and thousands and thousands of people that come in, some from other parts of the state. They would stay in hotels, they would eat the food, they'd spend a fair bit of money. And places that are near those duck hunting places, duck hunters would come throughout the year and stay in hotels and eat the food. And so those small towns really came to depend on them. And they're one of the arguments that people had about going away from that is that, well, we need to continue to support the small towns. And Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency's response, well, probably not very loud and not very insistent, but a fair response would be, that's not our job. Yeah, it's great if we can help small towns, support their economy, but the job of our state wildlife agency is to support our wildlife. And if we're doing something that hurts wildlife to help small towns, then we're not carrying out our mission. You want to argue with me, Logan?
I'll keep it my mouth shut.
I could argue, but I'm just going to let you.
We'll have a day.
You'll have your day. You'll have your day. Good.
I just think that it took out sportsmanship. Like getting everyone together, stuff like that. But evolving with the technology and doing the drawing system, I don't approve of that.
But
So-
could it also bring out more people than what it normally
Well,
would?
it could, but if you're going to take off a day to come out and draw a blind, you're going to take off 60 days if you get drawn anyway. So if you're going to travel to come hunt, you're going to travel to come get a blind.
Okay. We'll talk. It's good. Good arguments, and we could argue this up one side and down the other. Let's argue this some more later. Good. Okay. Okay, I'm going to get into something that those of you who have taken principles of wildlife management already will remember. Okay, and that's the concept of maximum sustainable yield. When we're trying to figure out how many deer, how many elk can we harvest sustainably each year, then there are a variety of simple models that we can use. So for those of you that haven't had too much of this yet, if we consider this y-axis the number of animals and the x-axis time, what we'll see over time, if you just put a handful of this species in an area, that population hopefully will eventually start to grow faster and faster until it gets to a point where it eventually inflects and levels off at carrying capacity. This is the maximum density of individuals that region can hold, right? That inflection point, okay, occurs at exactly 1/2 of carrying capacity. So if we can figure out what that is, then that's a very valuable thing, okay? So maximum sustainable yield is the harvest level that results in the maximum rate of population growth. And that actually occurs right here. If we could hold a population at 1/2 of K, if we can figure out what that is, each year they'll have young in the spring, the population will go up, and we can harvest them back down to that level again, year after year. That's the maximum that we can harvest sustainably, okay? That's the best that we could do if we could figure out how to do it. So that's achievable when population size is at the inflection point of that. It's called the sigmoid growth curve of the logistic population equation. The formula to maintain that is called the maximum sustainable harvest formula. That is, the amount that we harvest is equal to K, which is the carrying capacity, times R, and that's the maximum sustainable rate of increase. Some species increase much more quickly, some species increase much more slowly. These tend to be R-selected species, these tend to be K-selected species, right? So KR divided by 4. So we know what that is, and we can estimate what that is. We just multiply and divide by 4, and that tells us how many animals we can harvest. Easier said than done, right? Okay, we don't always know what it is. It shifts around, so it's tricky. Maximum population size and maximum productivity are biologically incompatible goals. You can't hold a population here and harvest many animals sustainably, okay? You can't hold a population here and think you're maximizing your population size, right? So generally what we do is if a species is endangered, we're shooting to get it up to here. If a species is game and it's a really popular game, people want to harvest a whole bunch of them, we try to hold them right here, generally speaking. Good? Everybody got that? Know that. Know that. Who remembers discussions about quality deer management? Okay. About 10, 20 years ago, once our deer population in the southeastern United States was fully recovered, we were shooting more and more does, but people were starting to think, the bucks just aren't getting as big as they ought to. I'd like to see the bucks get bigger. I want more big bucks. Some people were interested in managing for trophies, right? But the job of a wildlife agency is not to create trophies. It's to create healthy populations, right? But what we came to recognize is that if you have a really healthy population, that's going to include a few big deer, okay, that could be considered trophies. So don't manage for trophies, manage for healthy populations, and you'll get a few trophies while you're at it, all right? So.